Thank you to everyone who's joined us so far. Just want to introduce you all to myself. My name is Dr. Christine Crawford, and I'm an adult and child psychiatrist, and I work at Webster Clinic. Now, Webster Clinic is a group private practice that's based out of Boston. We're located in the Back Bay of Boston, and we are a group of psychiatrists that see adults, children, and teenagers. And we provide comprehensive mental health care to people across the entire life spectrum, providing psychotherapy, medication management, family therapy, couples therapy. So make sure to check us out at websterclinic.com so you can learn more about our practice. But again, so happy that everyone is able to join us today for this very important and very timely webinar. So the topic for today's webinar is titled How to Talk to Your Child About Difficult World Events. Now, if you are watching this video, if you are here right now for this webinar, that means you are an adult who truly cares about making sure that the kids in your life have all the tools and supports that they need in order to navigate this world that's filled with so much uncertainty. So kudos to you for being an amazing caregiver, parent, educator, or whoever you are, that you took the time out of your day to join and to watch this video so you can learn how you can be a more effective and more supportive adult to the kids in your life. So we're going to talk about this because I know that it brings up a lot of anxiety for parents and caregivers. How do you talk to your kids about what's happening in the world? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to provide you with a roadmap for our talk today and what it is that we're going to cover. So first and foremost, it's important for us to understand, why do these conversations even matter? Why do we even need to talk to our kids about what is happening in the world and what it is that they're hearing about in the news? So we're going to cover that. But it's also important to understand how our kids are already processing hearing scary news or processing hearing news about difficult things that are happening in the world. So we'll talk about that, including from like a neurobiological standpoint. And then we're going to cover 5 steps that you all can kind of put into your back pocket as you're thinking about having these conversations, if they were to come up with your kid about what is happening in the news. So we're going to go through all of these 5 steps in detail so that by the end of this webinar, I hope that you feel like you have a few more tools in your toolbox that you can actually access when you find yourself in a conversation with your kid about what's happening in the news. So let's get into it. So, first and foremost, why do these conversations matter? Now, I just need to break it to you, and this might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but the reality is your child is probably already hearing about what is happening in the news. They probably are already hearing about all of these distressing events. So they're already exposed to this. They're exposed to the news through their peers or people at school, teachers, through social media. And also, if you have found yourself thinking, oh, well, I think I've been shielding my kids from hearing conversations that I have with other people in the family, with my spouse, with other adults about what's happening in the news. But chances are your kids are probably listening in on some of those conversations, and you probably don't even know anything about it. And the thing is, it's probably easier for some of us to think, oh, well, I don't really want to say anything. I think it's better if I just ignore it or not even bring it up. But the thing about it is, you'll actually do more harm than good if you don't talk about what is actually happening. Because kids, they have vivid imaginations, they have amazing imaginations. And sometimes, when there are gaps in their understanding as to what is happening in the world or what do these events actually mean in the much larger context, what they'll do is their imagination will fill in the gaps. And sometimes they'll fill in those gaps with maybe thoughts or information that is far scarier than the actual event. And that can amplify anxiety. So silence doesn't protect them. It could potentially make things worse. And so we also need to be mindful of the fact that how we respond to what is happening in the world, how we respond to this conversation about what's happening in the news, how we show up to this conversation really has a tremendous impact on how the kid would actually feel about the event. Because if you are quite anxious and overwhelmed and you're super scared, you appear to be frightened by this, then that is going to make the kid conclude that if the adults in my life are scared, if they're, frightened by all of this, then maybe I should be frightened too, because that's scary. And so just having a kid, see how it is you're responding to this, it can help shape and guide how it is they should respond to it. And we want our kids to feel safe. And one of the first ways in which our kids can feel safe, facing all of this uncertainty, is if we make them feel safe by us being a calm, steady presence in their life. And the other thing, too, when it comes to having these conversations, they matter because your kids learn and grow from these conversations because they're able to build up different tools that are needed to understand how to deal with and tolerate stressful information and stressful news, how to deal with big emotions that are generated from what it is that they hear about in the news. So, actually, these conversations help to build emotional intelligence because it provides an opportunity for you to connect with their kid to understand how do they feel about this particular event, how you feel about that particular event, and it gives you an opportunity to connect and for you to share some strategies as to how they can navigate this. So over time, you're actually through these conversations helping your kid build emotional capacity, build tools for how to deal with very distressing and difficult things that might pop up in their lives in the future. Now, the thing about it is that this can all be quite scary. And a lot of parents are held back. A lot of adults feel held back because they're worried about saying the wrong thing. They're worried about how they're going to navigate these conversations if their kid were to bring it up and their kid were to come up to them and say, Mom, have you heard about this bad thing? Tell me what's going on? What's going on? And it's a fear that can be quite paralyzing and make a lot of adults freeze, and they kind of enter into a state of panic sometimes because they're wondering, what should I actually say? And the big question that I hear from lots of parents time and time again, am I going to traumatize my kid if I say the wrong thing? If I enter into this conversation and I don't have the right answers to some of these questions, am I going to mess it up? And the thing is, the good news is that you won't mess it up because you're actually showing up, you're actually listening to your kid, you're being open and responsive. But it's important to know that it's not the actual conversation that causes them harm. It's if you're not willing to engage in the conversation and if you're not mindful of how you're showing up to the conversation, right? So if you're not being fully mindful of how you are presenting yourself during the conversation, you're not mindful of how it is that you're feeling in your body during the time in which you're engaging in this conversation, if you're noticing that you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or anxious, that's the thing that can really rub off on the kid and make them feel a little bit more worried or scared or not quite at ease with what is going on. So I say all that to say that it is not the conversation that causes harm. It really is how we show up to it. So it's not about having the right words. It's not about having all of the answers. It's not about being an expert on all things current events. It's really just about being willing to have the conversation and being mindful of how you show up to it. So, what we do know is that adults, parents, and caregivers, when they engage, even if it's not perfect, it really helps kids to feel seen, safe, and less alone. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. Now, for those who are on the call, I imagine that there are kids in your lives who are of a variety of different ages. And I do think it's helpful for adults to have an understanding as to how kids of different ages, how it is that they process information, how it is that they process scary news that they hear about. And I think for parents to have this understanding as to what a kid's brain looks like at a particular developmental stage, or kind of what is the capacity of their brain, or what sort of emotional tools the kid has at these different age stages is so helpful, because that can help you to adjust the way in which you show up to the conversation, in which you engage in the conversation, and some of the level of detail in which you go into when it comes to this conversation. So, breaking it down a little bit, when it comes to kids who are between the ages of 3 to 6, you know, their thinking is still largely what we call egocentric. Basically, it means that they're the center of the universe and everything is really about them. And they also have what's called magical thinking. So, it's almost as though like their imaginations can really take off with some of the news that they hear. And so they might have different ideas that might not actually be based in reality. So an example could be like, oh, like if this bad thing is happening here, that means that bad things are happening everywhere. It's just spreading like how a cold spreads. And it's because they're not quite, aware of how these things work, but it's because their brain is just used to engaging in this magical thinking and thinking in which like their imagination really takes hold. The other thing too about kids who are of this age range is that it actually is still tricky for them to distinguish between images that they see on TV or images that they see on social media in real life. So, a concrete example of that is if your kid of this age were to see a video on the news about a fire that's happening in a house, or had happened already, and a house was burning down, they might think that that house is still burning right now, even though it's a video that was taken a while ago. They might not quickly pick up on the fact that that house still isn't burning. So that's kind of like where their minds are at. It's just really hard for them to distinguish, okay, is this happening right now or did this happen in the past? And oftentimes, when kids are exposed to news that is scary and that's distressing, that can be overwhelming to them, as a way to respond to that, sometimes they may engage in some behavior that might seem a little regress. So, what I mean by that is behavior that they might have exhibited when they were much younger. You might see that show up in the context of a really difficult situation that might be coming up. And this is something that is actually quite common. So, things like bedwetting, or seeing that your kid is much more clingy to you, or noticing that your kid is really struggling with their sleep, that's something that is quite common that we see in this age group whenever it is that, they're exposed to a stressful thing, or they heard about something that's very stressful. Now, when it comes to kids that are between the ages of 7 and 11, this is a group that has a little bit more cognitive capacity. So these are kids who want to know a few more facts. They want to better understand cause and effect, but they're also picking up a lot of information from their peers. And some of this information, quite frankly, can be inaccurate. Or the information is incomplete or is exaggerated. And so this is an age in which misinformation, it spreads super fast and it can take root. Now, when it comes to kids who are between the ages of 12 to 18, what we know to be true is that they might not seem super bothered by what is going on. They might seem unfazed. You might wonder to yourself, do they even know what's going on? But we can't always assume by the way in which a teenager is showing up to things, if they are calm, cool, and collected, that underneath all of that, that they're not feeling very anxious or distressed by it. So we can't always make assumptions when it comes to our teenagers. When they appear unbothered, they might actually be struggling with it internally. So a lot of our teenagers, they tend to internalize a lot of things more deeply, internalize their emotions. So it's hard for us to truly notice and be able to tell from their outward appearance how they are really processing some information. And so, what they're also grappling with when it comes to hearing about this news is they're wondering about not only about the particular events and the details associated with it, but they're also struggling with much bigger questions. They might struggle with things like, well, if this is happening, what does that mean for the future? What does that mean for my future? Is the world actually safe? Does anyone care about this? And so knowing where your kid is at developmentally and the way in which they process this type of information can help you pitch the conversation at exactly the right level. And so we're going to cover that a little bit more in step 3, but I wanted to just lay out this groundwork for you all right now. So let's dive into the steps. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier before about the importance of being mindful of how it is that you're showing up to these conversations, but that is definitely step number 1. You want to make sure that you pause and that you regulate yourself before you engage in this conversation. So, an example could be your kid shows up. Mom, what is going on with this news? I'm so scared about what it is that I heard. Oh my gosh, what do we oh, and if you haven't had the time to kind of process this information yourself, what you could say is, yes, I would love to talk to you about this. It is certainly overwhelming, and I'm feeling a little nervous right now. I just need to step away for a little bit and I'll circle back and we can talk about this a little bit more in detail. Or I just need to take a little bit of a walk, or I just need to kind of step out for a little bit, but give me a few minutes and then we can have this conversation. So say whatever you need to say, do whatever you need to do before you show up to that conversation if you're not feeling quite fully calm and steady in that moment. And why that is so important is because kids borrow our nervous system. So if we're feeling anxious, if we're rushing, if we appear tense, they're going to feel it immediately before you even say anything, right? And if you hold on to that, kids borrow our nervous systems. They really do. And there's a number of different explanations as to why that happens from a scientific or neurobiological standpoint, but it is so true. So think about these 3 strategies to help regulate yourself in the moment. Take a deep breath. Now, a lot of folks are like, yeah, 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 everyone's always talking about deep breathing, whatever, whatever. But there's actually a reason why we go on and on about deep breathing. It's because when you take deep breaths in and out, you're activating the diaphragm. And when you do that, that actually activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically a fancy scientific term to say that is the part of our nervous system that helps calm us down, to help make us feel less overwhelmed. It helps makes us feel less activated. And it's the opposite of our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. So all of that basically means is that when you are taking a deep breath in and out, you're activating a part of the nervous system that's going to send you all of these different signals in your body to make you feel relaxed. It's going to make your heart rate go down. It's going to make you feel less tense. It's going to make your blood pressure go down. The other strategy to think of, and I had mentioned this already before, is it's okay to give yourself permission to wait, to say, let me think about it. And to be honest, to say, let me think about it, that is like a complete answer. That's it. That's like a complete sentence. Let me think about it. And it's important to be honest with your kid in terms of where you're at. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Your calm is the most powerful thing that you bring to the conversation. So digging into the science a little bit more. And I always find that when parents and caregivers, as well as educators, when they have a better understanding as to the science behind it, a better understanding as to kind of what a kid's brain looks like at that particular time in a kid's development, um, it really makes it easier for them to have a better understanding as to what it is that their kid is experiencing in that moment. But we already know that kids' brains, they're still developing, and really that front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to kind of with self-regulation, it helps with us to plan and organize things and to reason with things. That's still developing, and the brain doesn't finish developing until someone is in their mid 20s. So kids are really showing up to these conversations the best that they can with the brains that they have at that moment of time. So, one of the reasons why I keep going on and on about how kids borrow our nervous systems is because there's something called mirror neurons. And this is the actual thing, guys. Like, this is something that's happening in the nervous system. So, kids have neurons, or they have like these cells in their brain and in the nervous system that actually mirrors exactly the emotional state of the parent in their life. Like, they are actually taking in some of the observations as to how their parent is responding to something, and then they kind of mirror that same behavior, which can be really surprising to a lot of people that that's something that happened. But that is really the mechanism behind why it's important for you to show up very calm and steady, because the brain of your kid will actually mirror that state of steadiness. So it's not a choice that kids are making, in terms of how they react or respond. It's basically like a neurological response. The other thing too is that there's this concept called the window of tolerance. So when your kid is feeling super overwhelmed, they are feeling anxious, it might be hard to talk to them, to communicate with them, to give them information, because their brain and what it is that they're going through, it's outside of a window in which your kid is actually able to process information. Kids are better able to process information when they're calm and collected, but anything outside of that, when they're feeling overwhelmed, they can't really process anything. So the more that we can assist in this kind of state of regulating themselves and making them feel more calm and relaxed, it actually helps widen the window in which we can have more conversations, in which we can help provide more support and teaching to our kids so that they can further build their emotional capacity. When we're stressed out, when our cortisol levels are sky high, which is the stress hormone, that can make our kids' cortisol levels really high too, without even talking. So, having lots of stress hormones float around your body can also have a negative impact in the long term for your kid if they have chronically high cortisol levels. But it's important for you to know, and this is the good news here, is that if you are consistently showing up for your kid and you are always there, you're, doing your best to be a trusted, supportive adult in their life who's guiding through all of these difficult times, then you're actually building resilience in your kid. And you're also helping to build a better, like, architecture within the brain itself that really allows for the kid to be even more regulated when they grow up. It provides the architecture that allows them to have all the tools that they need in order to deal with really difficult, stressful things, and to have the capacity to access some helpful tools in the moment rather than to feel overwhelmed and have major issues kind of managing themselves. All right, so that was a lot of science talk, and thanks for bearing with me. But again, it's really helpful for some people to understand the scientific aspect of some of this stuff. Now, step two. This is a really important one, and it sounds so simple, but it totally changes everything. It's a simple thing, but it really does change everything. So, before you explain anything, before you start opening up your mouth and giving all these details and what have you. You want to ask your kid, what do they already know? You want to know what they already know about this particular event so you can have a sense as to what you're working with, where you're starting. So simply asking your kid the question, tell me, what have you heard? Is fantastic. Now, as adults, we're so used to kind of like jumping in and kind of going into problem solving mode, and we do a lot of talking. But when it comes to these sort of conversations, it's actually best to do more listening than to do more talking, especially when we're at this stage and early on in the conversation itself. And here's why all of this matters a lot when it comes to asking kids what they already know. Um, in my clinical work that I do, I've met with a number of kids who they were barely aware that something bad happened in the news. But then there was like a well-meaning adult who sat them down and they said, this is what's going on. They gave them lots of details about this particular event. And the kid wasn't even thinking about any of this. And now suddenly you have a kid who knew nothing about this situation, who didn't really care to know much about the situation, and now they're scared and now they're terrified of it. And so just, asking that will give you a sense as to where you need to start. It also gives you an opportunity to correct any misinformation before it takes root. As I mentioned before, what kids imagine and may be far scarier than reality. So this gives you an opportunity to correct some of that information, to ask questions about, oh, well, where did you hear that from? Oh, help me understand why it is you think that. And then you can kind of jump in and course correct. And also, you don't want to overwhelm your kid. And so, you really want to keep it simple when it comes to having these conversations. So, getting a sense as to where they're at with the details prevents information overload. And at the end of the day, what we really want to happen is for there to be a dialogue, a two-way conversation, rather than it being a lecture. So, if you start off the conversation with a question, that makes it a lot easier for there to be a back and forth conversation as part of this discussion. So then we have step 3. Now, step 3, again, this is another one that sounds like super simple, um, but it's really important to be simple and to be age appropriate as we are navigating this conversation. So we really want to make sure that we're calibrating the conversation to where a kid is at developmentally. Now, for the little ones, going back to our 3 to 6 year olds, as I mentioned before, their brains are still in the magical thinking phase. So they don't understand that when bad things happen to some people, they may not happen to other people. And they just really need some concrete reassurance. But more importantly, they want to feel like the adults in their life have a sense of control and that they're going to keep them safe. So you want to use simple, calm language. You want to focus on, using language like, oh, there are helpers, there are people that are going to help out. Keep it simple rather than going into all the graphic details or to try to dive into rather abstract concepts. So, example language that you can use, say if there was some news about like a natural disaster and there was a big storm and there was lots of property destruction. Example language you can use in that situation is, there was a big storm far away. A lot of people are working hard to help, and there are special helpers whose job is to keep everyone safe. And that's it. It's really important to just keep it safe, to focus on helpers, to keep it simple, to focus on helpers, to keep it on safety, and for you to remain calm. Now, for our kids who are 7 and 11, they're starting to ask a lot of questions about why and about how. They want to know a little bit more facts. So you want to give them brief and accurate information. But you also want to validate some of their questions and say, oh, yeah, some of your questions, these are good questions. Should feel comfortable with saying, let me check on that. I'm not quite sure. And you also want to hear about what they've heard from some of their friends. Because again, I told you about this misinformation and their imaginations can certainly fill in the gaps. So we want to say things like, Oh, something serious happened. People got hurt. There are police, doctors, and community leaders working on it. What have you heard? I want to make sure you have the right information. So to kind of weave in that piece where it allows you, again, to hear what they heard, to correct any misinformation, to answer any questions that they have is very important. And when it comes to our teens, again, parents underestimate this group because they might seem unfazed, but sometimes maybe they're still trying to process the actual event. Because again, they're trying to process what does all of this mean? So they're really taking this seriously. They're thinking about much bigger questions. And they're also trying to wonder, do I have a sense of agency in all of this in terms of what is happening? So when you think about your teen as someone who is really actually perhaps thinking quite critically about this, it allows you to maybe perhaps address the conversation with a little bit more complexity, and invite them to share their perspective on the situation before you jump in and share yours. So you could say things like, oh, yeah, I know, this is a lot to take in, what's happening in the world. And to be honest, I don't have all the answers. Like, I also don't understand what's happening, but let's look into this together. How are you feeling about it? Is there anything you want to do about it? So that could be a great way, again, to engage in that conversation with some of our teenagers. One of the big things too, when our kids are approaching us about, oh, what's happening? How do I make sense of this? The big question, honestly, that they're asking you in that moment is, am I safe? Are we safe here? Are you going to protect me? They really want to know that. That's the big thing. And that's sometimes kind of what's driving some of the conversations some of the questions that are showing up in the conversations around these sort of things. Um, and we can oftentimes feel this need to jump in and provide immediate reassurance. Oh no, everything is fine. Nothing bad will ever happen to you. Oh, you don't need to worry about yourself. Oh, don't stop. Don't keep asking all these questions. You'll just worry yourself. When you provide that sort of response to like your kid asking questions about what's happening and oftentimes kind of realizing that's what's underlying a lot of these questions is around, am I safe? Are you able to take good care of me? Are you able to keep me safe? When you kind of close the door and you provide this immediate reassurance, don't worry about it. You're really also closing the door on the opportunity to connect with your kid around how they're thinking and how they're feeling about this moment. But more importantly, you're also closing the door on an opportunity for you to share skills and tools with your kid, again, on how to navigate and how to make sense of difficult news. And so when I talk to a lot of parents, I talk to them about approaching conversations about mental health from a place of intentionality because kids are walking around this earth with empty toolboxes. And our jobs as adults is to fill that toolbox with different tools, emotional tools that kids can learn along the way. But if we are not intentional about having conversations, talking about emotions, talking about how one feels inside, they're not going to have any tools in their toolbox when they're old like you. So we got to start filling up those toolboxes now. So things that you can say, you want to be realistic about, providing reassurance around safety. You want to say things like, my job is to keep you safe. I take that seriously. It's okay to feel scared. I feel scared too. But my job is, again, to keep you safe, and I'm going to do the best that I can. If you want to talk about this, whenever you want to talk about it, you can approach me and then I can support you through it. So, again, don't provide immediate reassurance. You do not want to close the door on any opportunities to connect with your kids and to fill that toolbox. And then step 5, the last step is this is a hard one, to be honest with you guys, is to limit media exposure and to think about limiting media exposure even within your own home. And there's a lot of, and I'm guilty of this too, where, you're in the house and you have the TV on, um, or you're listening to a podcast or whatever, and it kind of serves as this like ambient noise. And so you may not be fully paying attention to what is being said on the TV or on the podcast, but your kids are actually absorbing some of that, what we call ambient media, even if they appear to be busy or playing. So they're actually taking in some of the things that they're hearing, and we're not even fully aware of it. So just be mindful of your environments, be mindful of what it is that you have on in terms of the radio, podcasts, and TV, because kids are really picking up on it, even if it looks like they're not. And some of the research does show that kids don't have to be sitting down and watching the news to take in some of this stuff. They're actually just absorbing it when they're just doing basic things. So the imagery, the tone, and the repetition of scary headlines that can quietly raise their baseline anxiety. And, for younger kids, you might even think about just turning off background news entirely. And for older kids, it's not about banning news from the house. No, it's not about that at all. It's more about, okay, thinking about opportunities in which we can watch the news together, creating opportunities in which you can, co-view whatever it is that's on social media, on YouTube, so you guys can have a conversation about it in real time so that you can quickly help to support, help to regulate, help to provide more details or information for your kid in real time, rather than them kind of walking around with lingering questions or ongoing anxiety about a particular thing. The other thing is that it is important to help kids develop some literacy when it comes to the media. There are lots of headlines that we see, whether it's through our notifications on our cell phones, whether it's when we're scrolling the news and we're seeing all these headlines. But here's something that's really important to keep in mind is that not every headline is designed to inform you. They are designed to activate you. Okay, let that sink in, right? And this is a lesson to also teach your kids, right? So that they can better sift through all the headlines that they are exposed to. Because right now, news is different, than it was back in the day when you had to find out what was happening, not only in your community, but in the world. The only way you could find out was if you sat down for the 6 p.m. news or the 6:30 news if you're on the East Coast. That was the only way that you knew what was happening. We didn't have all of these fancy things on our phones to inform us of what was happening in other parts of the world, right? Um, and so now that there's lots more headlines that are coming across our way, but we need to remind ourselves and our kids that, again, they're not designed always to inform us, but they are designed to keep us engaged in this 24/7 news world. So when the hard questions come, again, it's okay to just provide these simple answers. Sorry about that, guys. So to say things like, say if a kid comes up to you and asks, "Could this happen to us?" Some example language here. I don't know for sure, but it's my job to protect you, and I take that very seriously. Another question that's oftentimes hard to answer is, why do people do bad things? And this is something that trips me up sometimes when it comes to my own kids. And I think having some of this kind of language at your fingertips, not that you have to memorize what's on this slide or pull this out when you're engaged in a conversation with your kid, but sometimes it's helpful to just see how simple the language needs to be or how it could be. So just having this as a framework is helpful. But when you're asked a question, why do people do bad things? You can say, well, that's a really important question. Some people make very hurtful choices. Most people don't. If they ask you, are you scared too? Man, you could answer honestly. Sometimes I feel worried, but when I do, I take care of myself so that I can take care of you. And lastly, why don't you do something about it? And I could see like a teenager asking this, or someone who's 7 to 11. Again, that sense of agency in terms of like, we got to do something. But you could say, yeah, you're right. We should care about this, but let's think about what we can do together. Now, I just want to quickly touch upon, discussing whether or not, your kid might be struggling with some of the news that they're hearing about, with some of the things that they're being exposed to, and trying to figure out, is this having a much more significant impact on my kid's overall well-being? And that's an important thing to be mindful of. But some signs that might indicate that your child might need some extra support and that they might need more than just a conversation is if they're having any issues with their sleep, they're having ongoing nightmares, and this is going on for a couple of weeks, problems falling asleep and staying asleep. If you're noting a consistent pattern of some of these regress behaviors that I mentioned before in terms of our younger kids, bed wetting and thumb sucking, you're seeing that happening a lot more often, and before it like wasn't showing up as much. If they're asking you repeated compulsive questions about safety, even after you've provided a lot of responses back to the same questions, but they keep showing up with the same questions. If they're doing things that indicate that they're not functioning, like they're not going to school, they're not eating properly, their energy level is low, or physically they're having issues, stomach aches, headaches, and they're missing school from that. Or they don't even want to socialize, they don't want to hang out with their friends. Or if they're having thoughts that are just popping up in their head that are quite distressing, that are, showing images that are popping up in their head about the scary event, but also, if they're saying things about being hopeless, about not wanting to be alive, that is a clear sign that they do need some additional support. So if you see any of this going on for a couple of weeks, you definitely need to consider consulting a mental health professional. So, what I'm going to do is just wrap up here and just let you know it's not about just one conversation. It's really about building resiliency in your kid. And so, we want to do this on an ongoing basis, not just when your kid approaches you and has a question, but we want to be able to create opportunities as often as we can to connect with our kids, to better understand how they are thinking about things, how they're processing all of the things that are happening around them. So we want to normalize these conversations rather than making it seem like these are like one-time outlier conversations, right? So by creating regular check-in routines is really helpful because then you can have a better sense as to where your kid is at from like an emotional standpoint on a daily basis. So if you're able to have dinners together or you're in the car driving somewhere, or even when you're putting them to bed at night, kind of checking in on two highs. What are two great things that happen? And what's one hard thing that happened? Even engaging in that little routine can really be helpful. Use books and media intentionally, again, to help build media literacy, but also to help kids better understand these hard topics and to give them language for understanding it and to kind of distance like their emotions or their feelings from it if they kind of have more understanding as to what's going on. You want to also kind of model how to cope and how to deal with really stressful things. So think out loud about how you're feeling, how you're doing. And that way your kids can also build up their language bank around how to talk about these things. So saying things like, I'm feeling stressed, feeling so stressed, I'm going to take a walk. Kids learn by watching us. They learn by hearing us. So modeling that behavior can be really helpful. Fostering a sense of agency when your kid is like, we should do something about it. Sure, let's think about if we can donate something, if we can attend a community event, if we can write a card. That could be really helpful because when kids are feeling helpless, that can actually amplify their anxiety about the situation. Structure and routine is very important, especially during times of uncertainty, and that predictability can be deeply calming for kids during these moments of time that are uncertain. And you always want to keep the door open. You can come to me about anything, talk to me about anything. I mean it. And when your kid finally does open up and share something with you, you don't want to minimize it. You don't want to invalidate your experience. You want to be curious about their experience. We already talked about when to seek out a professional, but you can talk to a pediatrician, you could talk to your kid's school counselor, and then also if there's a more significant concern, or you don't even know if there's a significant concern, you can also reach out to a child and adolescent psychiatrist like myself, like us at Webster Clinic, and we can do a pretty detailed evaluation to understand what is actually going on with your kid and what are some resources that can be helpful for your kid. So here are some key takeaways here. You want to make sure that you're calm. You want to make sure you know exactly where your kid is at. So you don't want to speak up and explain too much before you know what it is that they know. You want to keep it simple. You want to let your kid know that they're safe and that's what your job is. Limit ambient media. That's something we often kind of don't think about, but something to have top of mind. These conversations, again, are opportunities to connect. So don't shut it down by providing immediate reassurance. And you don't want to shield your kid from the world, but you just want to let them know that you are here to face it with them. Okay? So I hope that you found some of the strategies here helpful, those 5 steps that you can take. Um, we are going to share these slides with folks so that you can reference some of this stuff because I know it was a lot of information. But again, I hope that you all found it to be helpful. So those who are on the call, I welcome you to share any questions that you have to put them in the Q&A because I know that folks have a lot of questions about this. So please, 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 we'll use the next few minutes and I could just answer any questions that you might have and you can share them through the chat. So I already see one question that popped up here, and thank you so much for the person who submitted this question. But the question here was, well, you mentioned the importance of parents regulating themselves, but what if the child does end up witnessing a parent's emotional reaction to the news? How can we address this in a way that's safe and reassuring? I want to be clear here that us as adults, we are human beings too. We're humans first before we're mom, uncle, auntie, teacher, what have you. We are humans who experience the full range of emotions, right? And that's okay. But it can feel like a lot of pressure if we think that we need to be perfect all the time, if we have to have the perfect reaction response to things all the time. And that's not the case, and that's not true. But when you do notice, or when you're able to kind of reflect back, and you notice that when you found out about something, you were watching the news and you had a big response, and you're wondering, oh, did it kind of, worry my kid? I wonder what my kid thought about my response. I do think that it's important to address it rather than thinking to yourself, I kind of overreacted there, but I'm just going to keep it moving. I don't want to bring this up with my kid. I do think that it's important that after you have the big response and you're at a place in which you're calm, you're a little bit more steady and you're regulated, you can approach your kid and you could say to your kid, hey, I noticed that you saw me when I, heard about this thing that happened. And I know that mommy I started shouting at the screen. I was clearly angry. I wonder, what did you make of that when I responded in that sort of way? Again, you're approaching your kid with a question first to kind of get a sense as to where they're at, how it is that they kind of experience that reaction. And then what you can share with them is honesty. You could say, well, I'm sorry that was a big response and that it scared you, but to be honest, I was quite overwhelmed in that moment and I didn't know how to process it. But I realized that I was feeling really overwhelmed, and that's why I took a walk. That's why I decided to walk away from the TV. I turned off the TV because I really needed to calm myself down because I just wasn't feeling good. And I've noticed that when I've had these big responses, when I just take time for myself, I show up in a much better state. So again, I'm sorry, but that's how mommy deals with situations when she has a huge response, and I'm sorry I made you feel scared. So that could be one way in which you're addressing it while being honest and being a human being too. Another question that came through the Q&A was, now, if a child doesn't bring up world events at all, Should parents initiate conversations to prepare them or wait? What a fantastic question. A really important question. Well, one of the things that can happen is that if you find yourself watching TV, you guys are scrolling on your phones, looking at social media together, or you came across a notification about what had happened and you're in front of your kid, you can just think out loud about it in an age appropriate way. Again, because it's all about modeling. It's all about providing your kids with tools to fill their toolbox up on how to deal with heavily emotional things, right? So you could say something like, "Oh, wow." Say if you're listening to something on the radio, you could say, "Wow, that really is sad what's happening over there. And I really feel quite bad about what's going on, and it's been stressing me out a little bit. I wonder, is this something that you've been thinking about?" Just coming from a place of curiosity, asking some of those questions. But if they say to you, "No, I didn't even think about it at all. No, no." And you could just leave it at that, again, without overwhelming them, without going into lots of detail. I do think it is important to just kind of think out loud with your kids to see if this is something they're also thinking about, but to do it in real time rather than to structure these moments where you're like, "So now I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to talk to you about the scary things happening." No, you want to make it come up rather organically. You want the conversation to feel quite natural, and you want to be human and real in those conversations. But what you really are doing, you're modeling how to think through these things and you're filling up their toolbox. I love these questions, such great questions. So again, we're gonna post this video, this recording. We are also going to send the slides so that you can reference this as well. I also noticed that there was another question that popped up into the chat. Um, and this is a really good question too, especially thinking about young kids between the ages of 3 to 5 and wondering, how much do you lean into naming the reality, right? Of what is actually happening? And how much do you lean into reassurance? Again, when we're thinking about young kids who are really concerned about safety and they have that magical thinking, and sometimes they can think the worst and it can be quite scary to them. Um, and whether or not it's helpful to, name something as sad or to say things like war hurts people and assuring that the war they are thinking about is far away and not here and that they are safe here. So I think because it's this age group, less is more. So the person who wrote this comment, they're spot on in terms of if we're talking about war. To say something like, "What is happening right now is really, really sad, and it makes me sad. And it is happening in a place that is far away, but even though it's happening in a place that's far away, I still feel really sad that people are fighting in that sort of way." Um, I know that it can be hard to think about the fact that other humans hurt other humans, and it's just not right. But again, you're safe here. And I know that it might be hard to understand that you're safe here, but you really are, because I'm here with you. But if things were to ever change and that safety were to change, I'm here to take care of you. So you can label the event with kind of the emotional weight of it. Like, this is sad. This makes me angry. Because again, we want to help build that language around different emotional states and allow kids to feel like they have the language to use to communicate how they're feeling. So, kind of labeling war, that's sad. It makes me sad that people are being hurt. And this is happening far away. So, to do both, to name kind of and label like the emotional kind of impact of it, but also to stress the safety component too. So, really appreciate that question. Wow, you guys had really great questions here, and I really, really appreciate it. So again, we'll have this posted. We'll send you the slides, but if you guys have any questions or if you're interested in, getting your kid some additional help, or you don't know if there's something going on with your kid and you are a bit concerned, we here at Webster Clinic are available to do these evaluations to get a deeper understanding as to what's happening with your kid, and to again give you the tools and resources that you need to better care for your kid. But more importantly, we're here to also provide your kid with the tools and support that they need to navigate all of these things that are happening and to help support their mental health. So, thank you everyone for joining, and I hope that you all have a great rest of the day. So, thank you everyone. Bye.